Let's jump right in. Today, in this explainer, we're looking at a literal game changer in UK legal history. We're going to see how the tragic murders of two young people, Stephen Lawrence and Julie Hogg, literally forced the UK Parliament to rip up and rewrite centuries-old rules of justice. It's honestly an incredible look at how everyday citizens can take on a massive, complex legislative machine and actually win.
To really grasp the scale of this, you got to put yourself in this shocking scenario. Imagine a killer goes to trial, is found innocent, walks completely free, and then later on just openly confesses to the crime. Sounds insane, right? Well, historically, under an ancient legal principle called double jeopardy, that person could never ever be tried twice for the same offense. Once they were acquitted, they were practically untouchable, even if absolute undeniable proof of their guilt popped up the very next day. Now, sure, this was originally designed to stop the state from just endlessly harassing people, but man, for the victims' families and for all of us watching these massive miscarriages of justice, this rule was just absolutely devastating.
So you've got this crazy contrast between the super rigid ancient law and the desperately obvious need for a system that actually adapts to the truth. The old rule, completely black and white. An acquittal is final, end of story. But the new law, which, as we'll see, Parliament had to painstakingly build, says that a second prosecution is actually permitted. But, and this is a big but, only if new and compelling evidence emerges, and strictly for serious offenses. You know, this wasn't about giving the police unlimited do-overs. It was about restoring public faith. It meant that if something totally irrefutable came to light, like, say, a brand new DNA match or a tape-recorded confession, justice could still actually be served.
But laws don't just magically change overnight, do they? So what actually sparked this massive shift? Well, there were two huge catalysts here. First, you had Anne Ming. After the horrific murder of her daughter, Julie Hogg, she started this relentless, truly tireless campaign. She just flat out refused to accept that a killer could hide behind a legal technicality, and her fight really struck a chord with the British public. Then, second, you had the Macpherson Report. This was a deep dive into the profound institutional failures surrounding the murder of teenager Stephen Lawrence. When you put those two together, Anne Ming's campaign and the Macpherson Report, it created this massive, undeniable wave of pressure to finally scrap that old double jeopardy rule and drag the justice system into the modern era.
Okay, but wanting to change a law and actually getting it done? Two very different beasts. For these grieving families to get justice, they couldn't just win over the public. They had to navigate the insanely complex lawmaking machinery of the UK Parliament. And this machine is broken down into three distinct parts. First, the House of Commons, which is your elected representatives. Then, the House of Lords, acting as this vital double check on new laws. And finally, the monarch, who has to give the formal agreement. If you want a proposal, what they call a bill, to become a real law, it has to survive this entire massive structure.
So where does it start? Usually, to get a new law on the books, you start with the government. Now, while Parliament as a whole represents all the people, the government's specific job is to actually run the country. The government is formed by whichever political party holds a majority of the 650 members of Parliament, or MPs, in the House of Commons. Because they've got the numbers and they set the agenda, most proposals for new laws, including this massive push to change the double jeopardy rule, come straight from the government.
And the actual blueprint for that justice? It starts way before a law is ever voted on. The government kind of tests the waters first by dropping what's called a green paper. Think of a green paper as a rough draft or an initial report, really designed just to get people talking. It asks questions, gets feedback from organizations and the public, and basically says, hey, we have this problem. How do you guys think we should fix it?
Once they gather all that feedback from the green paper, they take it and upgrade it to the next level, the white paper. Now, this is a much more concrete, detailed plan for the new law. A lot of times, a white paper will even include a draft version of the actual bill they want to introduce to Parliament. So all those abstract ideas and public comments, they're finally taking a solid, actionable legal shape.
All right, now we enter the really grueling part, what you could call the Commons Gauntlet. Once that draft bill is ready, it goes into the House of Commons and has to survive 5 escalating challenges. Boom! First is the first reading. Honestly, this is just a formal announcement. Hey, this bill exists, no real debate yet. Then comes the second reading. And this is where the main principles are vigorously debated by the whole House, followed by a huge vote. If it survives that, it moves to the committee stage. After that, the report stage, where all the MPs step back, review the tweaks, and vote on amendments. And finally, the third reading. This is the absolute last chance for the Commons to debate the final contents and vote to either pass the whole thing or throw it out.
Let's actually rewind just a second to that third step, the committee stage, because this is where the really microscopic, nitty-gritty work happens. You've got a small committee of MPs from different parties literally going over the bill line by line. Just imagine the emotional weight in that room. During this intense scrutiny, families like Ann Ming's were watching, fighting tooth and nail to make sure every single word, like the exact legal definition of new and compelling evidence, was absolutely flawless. Also that killers couldn't slip through the cracks ever again.
Now, even if a bill survives that crazy gauntlet in the Commons, it's still not a law. Nope, it has to go through those exact same 5 stages all over again, but this time in the House of Lords. The Lords is made up of about 800 peers, and today that's a mix of life peers, 92 hereditary peers, and 26 Church of England bishops. Their main job isn't to govern the country, but to be a really meticulous secondary filter. They act as a massive double check, looking for loopholes or weird unintended consequences that the Commons might have just totally missed in the heat of political arguments.
So, what happens if the Lords say, hang on, we don't agree with the Commons, and they make changes? Well, the bill just bounces back to the Commons in this back and forth process that everyone affectionately calls ping-pong. But here's the really crucial democratic safeguard. The House of Commons always gets the final say on whether to accept or reject the Lords' tweaks. Why? Well, because the Commons is made up of those 650 MPs who were actually elected by the public. At the end of the day, the elected representatives hold the ultimate power.
Then we hit the very last hurdle. It's a formality, really, but a historically monumental one. Once both houses finally agree on the exact text, the bill is sent to the monarch to be signed. This is called Royal Assent. The king or queen gives their formal thumbs up, and literally instantly, that piece of paper becomes a living, breathing act of Parliament. And unless the act specifically says otherwise, that new law comes into force immediately.
Getting through that massive, exhausting gauntlet of green papers, white papers, readings, and committees, it takes ridiculous perseverance. But for these families, it resulted in a totally historic victory. Because in the year 2003, the Criminal Justice Act 2003 officially received Royal Assent. This was it. This was the exact piece of legislation that finally tore down the ancient double jeopardy rule, meaning that for serious offenses, if new and compelling evidence came to light, a second trial could actually happen.
And I really want to highlight what all that tedious bureaucratic struggle actually achieved in the real world. As the official record puts it, the change enables the killer of Julie Hogg and 2 of the suspects of the killing of Stephen Lawrence to be retried. Both were convicted. All those readings, all that ping-ponging, it ultimately meant that grieving families, after years of heartbreak and just relentless campaigning, finally got to see true justice served.
So it kind of leaves us with a pretty powerful thought to chew on. The UK's parliamentary process is incredibly rigorous, it's slow, and it's scrutinized to the max. But as the story of the Criminal Justice Act 2003 proves, the system isn't completely immovable. How does the power of the people shape the laws of the land? Well, by understanding the machinery, getting involved, and fighting with just absolute determination. Ordinary citizens can literally force a centuries-old system to evolve. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope it gave you a really clear view of how our laws are actually built.